For those of you who don't know Senator Lee, former Senator Lee has been integral in educational policy in his tenure with the state legislature, and is going to share his perspective on readiness and attainment. So, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
We turned on.
I don't know. Testing.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I'd love for you to take just a couple of minutes and talk about your background and just your legislative career. Just give us a little bit of background on that.
Sure. I'm a recovering politician. I served until November of last year. I was originally appointed to fulfill a term, so actually served about 2 full terms and lost my election in November. I'm a father of 4, ages 12 through now 19, as of a couple of days ago. And I'm a lawyer practicing in Wilmington, North Carolina. That's about all there is about me.
We just found out that we have some similar paths in the eastern part of the state. So he grew up in Dunn, North Carolina, and I grew up in Smithfield, and we feel like our paths may have crossed sometime in Benson.
Rainy day in Benson.
That only makes sense if you've ever been there on a weekend evening. Would you talk a little bit about what happens when you're tackling a specific policy problem or enacting a new program? What kind of factors do you think you and other policymakers need to take into consideration?
Evidence-based practices are always kind of the benchmark, what you're looking at in the area of education. And in other policy areas, you're really looking at the facts. So depending on what the policy is, and it also has a lot to do with, a lot of times, the organization and what kind of credibility they have that they're bringing it to you. And those are some of the things that you're kind of really looking at and really digging in.
What are some of the things when you were in office that you thought were some of the most pressing issues, or maybe even things that you see today in terms of education?
The issue that I've had is the inability to make progress in the area of education. And I'm not an expert in education. Y'all are experts in education. But from the outside looking in, as a parent, as someone who's lived in the state for a very long time, I ran for the Board of Education in 2004 because I was frustrated with some things that were going on. I lost that election too, by the way. And it just seems like because of the structure in North Carolina, the way that we're set up, the funding and governance, that it's been tough to make what I would consider real progress. So looking through that lens, it's kind of how the overall school district really kind of came about. I would look to experts and I would ask them, say, hey, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I was actually in Cupertino and met Lynn for the first time, and we had just a discussion that went on through the evening, and really that's how that kind of launched, and really kind of digging in and talking to some of the experts. Flexibility became one of those things. And I said, what if you could do whatever you want? The check comes in and you can govern your school district the way you want. And when we talked about this, and when we actually moved forward with it, and it happened very rapidly. You saw, for those of you who saw the presentation earlier, it happened in about 7 to 8 weeks from bill to actually beginning. And when she said, gosh, thank you, I said, no, thank you, because what's getting ready to happen is something that's never happened, and to start from scratch, essentially. And the reason that came about as well, from not only from a policy perspective, but from a funding perspective. We were trying to struggle with this idea of, education finance reform. You need transparency so we can see if we have adequacy. And we were really struggling looking at models from other states, and I was hoping the next couple of years going back to her and say, okay, how should we fund education? You've got the former CFO of Food Lion. Y'all are really working on this. You have credibility. You've got within not just the educational environment, but you have credibility within the halls of the legislature. So that was the grand plan or scheme, and it all stemmed from being very frustrated. We just couldn't seem to make progress.
So When earlier today, when Dr. Moody was speaking, she talked about turning over the transformation for schools to the teachers in the classrooms and really looking at how that transformation can happen from the ground up, like people who are on the front lines. You're a father of 4. You've been involved in educational policy, both as a student and now as a parent, and then also as a legislator. What are some of the innovative things that you think teachers can do or that schools can do to try to really instill that idea of innovation and progress?
You know, for me, it comes down to, I used to think about school as, you know, we didn't have really kindergarten graduation, middle school graduation, but high school graduation, college graduation, law school graduation, there was always an end to my education. We always thought about a terminal degree. You hear terminal degree. I would like to see my children learning to love education, to learn. But we keep thinking about things in the context of terminal degrees or degrees. That's what I'd really like to see. My son, who's 15 years old, and he's not a fan of math, but I will tell you that he has probably figured out more about math because he loves to surf, and he can tell you anything about when and how the waves are formed. He can tell you about, you know, the different pipes that he dreams of surfing down. And he can tell you all these different things, and he's learned that there's studies out about having algorithms for determining different wave sets, which I don't necessarily understand, but he can tell you all kinds of things. But he's really struggling with math because he's just not interested. There's a connection that could be made, and I just thought about that over the weekend, so now I'm trying to talk to him about it later this week to talk about some of those things. But love of learning really is where it all comes down.
I think we saw that yesterday in the film about the students who were doing the tiny houses and how we had a student who was not really interested in that, but then was able to really incorporate an idea of safety and security for their tiny house community. So I think finding ways to make connections is awesome. So I'd like to
Okay, I've got to stop talking about Senator Lowe. He's here now.
He's here now.
So don't tell him what I just said about him.
You did a wonderful job.
So welcome, Senator
Hello.
Lowe. We're just talking about Senator Lee's time in the legislature and his ideas on progress and education. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, just a minute, your history and your tenure in the legislature in terms of whatever you think we might need to know.
Well, I kind of fell into it. Matter of fact, me and Senator Lee, we came in together. We used to sit near each other, and I would whisper things to him about education and the latter. And I had been working in the community all the time, serving as a pastor of a church, which I've served at for almost 30 years now. And so I had been working in the community, doing different things, and one thing just led to another. Nation Hahn called me and asked me to come at the very last, there you are, at the very last minute, I think it was this weekend. And I said, some kind of way I'll figure it out. And he said he wanted me to talk about education and how education and the legislature kind of comes together. Mm-hmm. I have Louisiana roots. And in one sense, when it comes to education, when I look at it in the state of North Carolina at present, there's too many hands in the gumbo pot. Too much. Just too many. The legislature, Democrats, the Republicans, the governor, the superintendent of public instruction, the school board, any of us that come up with a bright idea that know just enough people, or is the party in power to get something passed. And I'm not sure that's the best way to do education. And certainly to make education viable for everyone in our community, which I'm not sure that that's happening when I look at the list of failing schools. We still have some major problems. So I'm not sure, I'm still wrestling with it, Michael.
So one of the questions a lot of people ask me is, how can you get bipartisan support? And I think that all in all, Democrats and Republicans actually agree on a lot more than we disagree on. We certainly agree there are these structural deficiencies in elected superintendent and appointed board, neither of which have any funding authority, and then the legislature that has the funding authority, and yet the legislature tends to be in the classroom, and that's the last place you need a policymakers in the classroom. These structural issues that we have in elected local board of education, and again, most of those don't have the ability to tap funds. It's a county commission. So some people call them checks and balances, but I think it's structurally in North Carolina, those are the biggest reasons that I talked about earlier. My frustration with the ability to move forward with real education reform and bold initiatives really comes down to the structural deficiencies that we have in North Carolina. It really only can be resolved in one of two ways. One is going to be constitutional amendments and some other structural changes, which are very difficult, take a lot of time, like a lot of lawsuits. And the other is working together, on the state level, but also on the local level. And as many people have said here today, it's about the kids. We've got to do what's in the best interest of the children. In order to do that, we have to be adults. And that has not been occurring. And Democrats, Republicans, local, state, I think a lot of us are guilty of those things, but we've got to find a way to come together, and I think there are going to be some real opportunities, hopefully, in the near future to do that.
So I really like what we're doing here is being able to have some conversations with different people from different perspectives, and I think really looking at how different stakeholders from different positions, from different places, from different puzzle pieces that make everything sort of work together are actually having some conversations and able to network with others. I know that we look at how each of us is part of the system and how each of us can also be part of the solution. So what types of conversations do you think we need to have in order to make education better in North Carolina? And who needs to be at the table?
You're the sitting senator. I'm recovering. So
You're recovering from being a sitting senator. I understand that. I think that we have to find ways, number one, to listen to each other and to find clear ways to bring all of the folks to the table. Poor folks, rich folks, in-between folks. We gotta find ways to bring all of those folks to the table and just look at what's best for all of the folks that need to be educated. In this case, I grew up and I was one of those kids that was bused. I remember in 71 when I was bused from one side of town to another. Now, there are people that hollered about having to go across town, but when I look back on it now, I was exposed to things I never would have been exposed to had I not had to go across town and go to school with rich kids. There's something to be said for exposing children, for them getting to know some people they would never have gotten to know, for them being able to learn some things from both sides of the street, so to speak. And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
I agree, and I think a lot of times it's, and again, I said Senator Lowe and I agree on a lot of things. I think a lot of people agree on a lot of things, but sometimes the words that we choose have so much baggage that go along with them. So we have to be, when we talk in the context of education and some other things, that we've just got to be a little bit more careful in the words that we choose, because people may hear something different than what we're saying. We need to look at education and financial reform, but we can't we can't really, it's something we were looking at. I think it got kind of slowed down for lots of different reasons, but we need to look at transparency in the system that we use, because we've got this allotment system that's incredibly complicated. Once we have transparency, then we can talk about adequacy. That's what's important to a lot of different folks. Transparency and then adequacy, then we can really know what's going on. I think Democrats and Republicans would get together if there was a real solution that helped children. Democrats and Republicans would rally around it. I think sometimes it's difficult to get that message out. There are a lot of different interest groups that are involved, a lot of them very well-meaning. I didn't say all. There are a lot of them that are very well-meaning, and they've got their own lens by which they're looking at things. But in order to truly make progress, we are going to have to sit down around the table with a lot of the folks that Senator Lowe and I talked about with regard to the structural issues that we've got in the state of North Carolina, and get everyone to buy into a strategic plan or a plan. And then a plan doesn't mean that we do something in the future, but that we can continually come back to it. It's not unlike a strategic plan or a business plan, and then we modify as we need to. And it's really got to be for the betterment of, irrespective of your socioeconomic level, race, rural, urban. We've got this rural-urban divide right now that is it's causing a lot of issues with statewide policy. And it's not
Havoc.
So these are the things we really need to be sitting down and having discussions about. We're not discussing things. When you communicate by press release, it's just not a good way to go.